Hey there, HorseCenter fans. Matt and I are back with another exciting edition of the show. Matt, we're only just over 5 weeks out from the Breeders' Cup Classic. I guess we got to talk about Breeders' Cup Classic prep races this week on HorseCenter.
We sure do. If it's getting that close, Brian, we better be talking about the Jockey Club Gold Cup at Belmont Park and the Awesome Again at Santa Anita.
Yeah, we'll throw in the Oklahoma Derby, an interesting field at Remington Park on Sunday. And Midnight Bassoon looks to go 7 for 7, Matt, in the Beldame. Watch it all right here on HorseCenter. Welcome to another edition of HorseCenter, everyone. I am Brian Zipsy, and as always, I have the outstanding pleasure of being joined by my co-host to the East Coast. That's Matt Schiffman. How are you today, Matt?
Brian, I am outstanding. That's the perfect word that you chose. Outstanding day to do HorseCenter.
Outstanding. Well, I have a head cold, but as they say, Matt, the show must go on. Let's get into it. Breeders' Cup Classic is only about 5 weeks away now, and we're going to see some major shifts here as we get closer to that Breeders' Cup Classic. Let's start in New York. Short field drawn for the Jockey Club Gold Cup, Matt. A lot of great horses have won this race over the years. It's a 1.25 mile Grade 1 Belmont Park. They start there on the turn. Not a lot of speed. Is Preservationist the speed of the field, sir?
I guess so. I don't know. Like you said, with the size of this field, I don't know if the having speed, the pace is going to be a particular a factor in this race. But yeah, small field. 3 out of the 5 horses are 3-year-olds. The Jockey Club Gold Cup is a race that has been won by 3-year-olds that have got on to get the division championship and do things in the Breeders' Cup. So interesting little group here.
All right. Well, let's start with the 4-horse, Matt, Preservationist, because I think the speed could play a big part. The pace of this race, or lack thereof, could play a big part in the running of the Jockey Club Gold Cup. Preservationist, 2 of his last 3 races have been pretty big, and that includes 10 furlongs at Belmont for the Suburban, where he really took it to Catholic boy. He looked McKenzie in the eye, or McKenzie looked him in the eye after Preservationist set the pace in the Whitney, couldn't sustain a challenge. He wasn't up to the challenge, let's say, Matt, of that test. But then he came right back for the Woodward and was a pretty solid winner of the Woodward, busting through horses. Preservationist looks like the most likely early leader to me. Are you on the Preservationist bandwagon yet?
I don't know, Brian. All of those races that you mentioned have come this year in his 6-year-old season, so it's hard, and he's done terrific things, run well at Belmont Park. I'm certainly one of the major contenders in the race, but asking me, no, Preservation is not going to be my top pick.
Okay. Well, Code of Honor is the horse that I expect will be favored slightly over Preservationist. Code of Honor, one of the 3-year-olds you talked about. Code of Honor won the Dwyer, seems like several months ago, but back in early July. Then he won the Travers, 1.25 mile Saratoga, of course, a big summer race for the 3-year-olds. I think he comes in here as the horse to beat. Matt, I also have him on my pace projection here as 5th of 5 early. Is Code of Honor going good enough where he can run down good older horses in the Jockey Club?
Well, I think it's Shug McGahee has found a perfect spot and a perfect time to find that out. I like the move that he's making, getting to run Code of Honor out of his stall at Belmont Park as a horse that obviously is come into his own and is getting better. I like the move. I think a win against older horses makes entry on his resume that it would be in big, bold letters to help him along towards a possible 3-year-old division championship. And then also you're racing for a win-and-you're-in spot in the Breeders' Cup Classic. So I like the move that Shug McGahee is making here, and I like Code of Honor in this race.
Okay, Code of Honor, like I said, probable favorite over Preservationist. I think those two will be the two they bet the most. I'm a little bit more worried than my partner, Matt Schiffman. My studious partner, Matt Schiffman, Code of Honor coming from fifth in this race in what could be a pretty paceless race. That does worry me. Is he good enough to pass horses, good horses, when the pace is slow? We will see. But certainly Code of Honor has put himself in great position. In that, I agree with Matt. In the Jockey Club Gold Cup, I think, hey, if he wins this race, if he beats older horses, I think Code of Honor moves to the head of the class of the 3-year-olds and is becomes the favorite for the Eclipse Award. Maximum Security has finished ahead of him twice, although one was a disqualification where he bothered, among others, Code of Honor, and Code of Honor was put up second in the Kentucky Derby. But Code of Honor wins the Jockey Club Gold Cup, go along with earlier in the year the Fountain of Youth, recent wins in the Dwyer and the Travers, and I have him atop the 3-year-old championship list. I think he's going better than any of these horses, and I think he's a big threat to win. But watch the pace. If it's slow and he's last early, that does scare me a little bit. One of the other 3-year-olds, Matt, that we were talking about, Tacitus, looks like he's got a big little case of second-itis. He's coming out of a second-place finish last time to Code of Honor in the Travers.
Yeah, for whatever reason it is, Brian, he has strung together 3 second-place finishes in a row. Granted, they were in very tough races, very competitive fields against the best horses. So they are not second-place finishes that are an embarrassment by any means, but they are there, Brian, and that makes Tacitus, to me, one of the mystery horses, one of the horses that it's hard to know what to expect from the Belmont trainee. But one thing we know for sure, like the others in this field, he can get the distance of 10 furlongs. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've got such a short field in here, which I'm sure there are plenty of people that are going to gripe about it. And you look down to Churchill Downs, where there's a race going 1 1/8 that's got 9 or 10 horses in it. I chalk a lot of it up to trainers not wanting to put their horses in going 10 furlongs when they can go 1 1/8. But Tacitus, we know, can get the distance, and I assume is going to be right there as the horses get near the wire.
Yeah, Tacitus is certainly a horse of class. The Wood Memorial Tampa Bay Derby winner has now lost 4 in a row. But like you said, Matt, he's run well every time, and certainly you would think he would be involved as this Jockey Club Gold Cup field comes down the stretch. I don't like the fact that he is not winning, starting with the Kentucky Derby. He's just not getting it done late against the very best, and that does worry me in this field. Probable third choice for the Belmont trained 3-year-old Son of Tappet. Like you, though, I do agree that 1 1/4 makes a lot of sense for him. 1 1/4, I think, also makes sense for Vino Rosso. Vino Rosso has done some interesting things this year. He shortened down to 7 furlongs for the Carter, went out to California to win the Gold Cup at 1 1/4. The Whitney, he actually ran by Preservationist to get third, but it wasn't a great third in the Whitney last time. He was given a little time off. He skipped the Woodward when Preservationist came back to win, and now Vino Rosso gets 1 1/4 at Belmont. Seems like a race, again, where he could be a threat as well.
Yeah, Brian, but I tell you what, at this point, to me, Vino Rosso is just, is kind of a riddle. I don't think we as handicappers have any way at all to possibly predict the kind of race that Vino Rosso is going to put out on the track. Could he win this race? Yeah, I guess so. He won the Gold Cup out at Santa Anita going 10 furlongs at a point where I, amongst others, was ready to say, okay, I've had enough of Vino Rosso. But then he comes back and runs a lackluster race at Saratoga. So here we are again. I don't know. At this point, that's all I can say about Vino Rosso. I can't use him at this point. I would have to let him beat me. Yeah,
well, as the fourth choice in here in a 5-horse field, I think I will use him a little bit. He hasn't proven that he can ever get by in the stretch, and it certainly worries me here that he can get by really good horses at 10 furlongs. I think this is a stronger Gold Cup, the Jockey Club here at Belmont, than the Gold Cup, formerly of Hollywood and now of Santa Anita, was. So I think Vino Rosso does have his work cut out for him. But I tell you what, he has shown the ability to show a little speed. He did run, as lackluster as that Whitney may be, he did run by Preservationist, or at least got to a point where he was involved at the head of the lane. Yoshida, I think a horse who likes Saratoga, and certainly McKinsey were better that day. If Preservationist, with a little time off, now he's been on the East Coast training well for a while, maybe he doesn't have a shot. Matt, there's only 5 horses. Let's talk about the 5th horse really quick. Luch Racing, RL Preservation, brings in Olympic Village, lightly raced. He's on a winning streak, Matt.
Well, that is for sure, Brian. They just claimed the horse for $75,000, came back in his 2019 debut to win that claiming race up at Saratoga. But still, Brian, as is the case with a lot of these horses that Luch puts in there, is a very, very, very long shot. But hey, there's only 5 horses in the field here, so he's going to get a nice check.
Yeah, Matt, I actually think he has a wonderful shot to finish in the top 5 here in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. So why not? Well, why not? Maybe it's just way too much too soon. I do wonder if maybe he shows speed. He has shown a little speed here and there. Maybe he shows some speed to keep Preservationist, if that's who indeed is on the lead, busy early. I don't know, maybe softens him up a little bit. But yeah, he's a deserving, very long shot in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. All right, Matt, it's hard for me a little bit to separate the top 4. Code of Honor, Preservationist, Tacitus, Vino Rosso. I like the odds of Vino Rosso a little bit as the 4th choice. I think maybe he's the one horse that they're going to forget a little bit. I want to use him. I'm not confident that he can win, but I'm going to use him a little bit in the exotics. I think Code of Honor, like you, is the one to beat, but I do think Preservationist has the tactical advantage, as I talked about. By the way, Code of Honor, his 2 races at Belmont Park have been very good. One last year in the Champagne and one earlier this year in the Dwyer.
Yeah, and you can say that of Preservationist too. He got that first stakes win at Belmont Park also, and he's running right out of his stall. So, it's an ideal setup for him. For me, I'm going to go with Code of Honor, but this is the kind of race that I look forward to watching and not particularly wagering on.
Fair enough. Matt's on Code of Honor. I'm going to bet on an exacta box, Vino Rosso with Code of Honor and Vino Rosso with Preservationist, and see what happens in the 5-horse field. Matt, earlier on the card, we have the Beldame, and there's a Horse of the Year watch for Midnight Bassoon, and rightfully so. She's 6 for 6 this year, Matt. She's run all over the country. She's won graded stakes in all 6 tries this year. She won that wonderful edition of the Personal Ensign over Elate. By the way, I didn't mention it, but kind of wish Elate was in the Jockey Club Gold Cup a mile and a quarter at Belmont, but it looks like she's headed to Keeneland for the Spinster. So no Elate in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, no Elate in the Beldame. It sure looks on paper like this is Midnight Bassoon's race to lose.
That is for sure. Yeah, running scared from Midnight Bassoon, so it seems. And rightfully so, as you rattled off some of the stats that the Steve Asmussen runner has put together this year. Another horse that loves Belmont Park, in addition to trying to extend her winning streak to 7 in this Grade 2 Beldame. She's also looking to continue on and go 3 for 3 in her career at Belmont Park. 1 turn mile and an 1/8 seems ideal for Midnight Bassoon. Not particularly strong field, like you said, Brian. She's going to be a big favorite, and for every reason.
Yeah, Matt, I think she's got a wonderful chance, by the way, to be the Horse of the Year for 2019. They don't usually give it to females, but of course it has happened. And Midnight Bassoon running strictly against females, that's just been wonderful. Some races are tough. Certainly last one in the Personal Ensign. Late, by the way, tried Midnight Basou 3 times this year, and Midnight Basou is still undefeated. That's how good Midnight Basou is. And you hit on a key point here. I think her Belmont Park for this long one-turn race is right up her alley. The daughter of Midnight Lou loves Belmont Park. And I'd be willing to say her 2 races at Belmont are among her very best in her career. So for me, this is a race of watch a really good horse do what a really good horse does. If you want to single her in the horizontals, I think that's the way to go, because I don't think she loses here at Belmont Park. Maybe if it was a different track, I would be looking a little bit more. There are a couple interesting horses, but not at Belmont. Midnight Basou goes 7 for 7 after this race, and she might be 1 race short of an 8 for 8 2019 season that could garner serious support for the Horse of the Year. Now, the 2 horses that I think are a little interesting, Matt, Wildcat got really good at this time last year. Wildcat came from Saratoga, which she's never run particularly great at last year, and she won the Beldame, and she ran a very good Breeders' Cup Distaff, finishing ahead of Midnight Basou, went second to Monomoy Girl. Can Wildcat do it again? Can she turn it around and become a real threat to Midnight Basou in the Beldame?
Well, at this point, Brian, we're talking about a whole different kind of Midnight Basou than we saw last year in the Breeders' Cup. At that point, that Midnight Basou was just starting to get really good, and now we've got the 2019 edition of Midnight Basou, and right now we got the 2019 edition of Wildcat, whose 2 races this year have not been particularly good. Yes, and I do agree with what you said, Brian, that that Saratoga does not seem to be Wildcat's favorite track, and Belmont Park obviously seems to be more to her liking, but it's going to take a serious turnaround in form from the top horse and from Wildcat for the upset to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt. Wildcat, last year, although on paper it looks like the form at Saratoga is very similar. That was when she first came over from Chile. It looks very similar, but her speed ratings last year, even in those losing performances at Saratoga, were better than this year. Last year, she caught a very weak Beldame. This year, she catches Midnight Basou. I expect her to move forward, do better at Belmont. I don't expect her to beat Midnight Basou, Matt. And the only other interesting one in the field of 6, Vexatious. Yeah. Vexatious is a very well-bred horse. She's back on dirt. She had some decent turf races in there. You'll remember she ran well in the Kentucky Oaks last year as a long shot. Her last few races, including a return to dirt, looked good. Maybe Vexatious is finally taking it to a new level. Maybe she's the threat at Wildcat to run second.
Yeah, that switch from turf to dirt and the nice second place loss by a neck at Saratoga caught my eye also, Brian, for this Calumet runner who's trained by Jack Sisterson. So I like her in here also.
Okay, well, those are the 2 horses that make sense, but I think, and Matt thinks, they're vying for second. Wildcat and Vexatious in here. 3 other horses in the 6-field, Beldame, Going 9 Furlong, Spring in the Wind, Another Broad, and Crimson Frost all look like long shots who would really need to step up to run a big race and maybe be a threat to run second. Maybe Spring in the Wind sets the early pace. It's hard to even tell for sure there. But Midnight Basou, enjoy it. This is a special year she's putting together in the Beldame. All right, Matt, we drop back to the females Saturday at Belmont. Belmont has a bunch of Breeders' Cup prep races we're not going to get into too much, but also Santa Anita does. And the one race I certainly want to mention, kind of a Breeders' Cup Classic preview theme here today on HorseCenter, is the Awesome Again. And this one, unlike the Jockey Club, is 9 furlongs. It's at Santa Anita where the Breeders' Cup will be held. And I think we do have the current Breeders' Cup Classic favorite in McKinsey. Last time, Matt, he won the Whitney against a good field in under a hand ride late. Yeah,
that when McKinsey is at his best, as he was in the Whitney, he can be very, very impressive. And McKinsey has, you look at his career record, he's got absolutely terrific stats, finishing basically first and second in all all of his races except one, and that was the Breeders' Cup Classic last year. But, McKenzie has been a horse who has not put two wins together since at the very, very beginning of his career when he broke his maiden and then won his next two races. Since then, he hasn't been able to put two victories together. Is that just coincidence or what? I don't know. But Awesome Again, in the Awesome Again, McKenzie's going to be a very, very big favorite.
Yeah, Matt, I'm gonna step out on a very odds-on limb, if you will, here, and say McKenzie does put two wins together here because I expect him to win the Awesome Again. Let's get real. Hate to do it in these short field big races, but once again, I don't see the chalk losing here. McKenzie was really awesome in the Whitney because Yoshida, Vino Rosso, and Preservationist, and maybe a long shot there on the rail, all had a prayer to win the Whitney as they straightened out. McKenzie proved he was just a different animal coming down the stretch there at Saratoga. It looked like he could have won by more than he did. I think he's the best older dirt horse in the country. Questions about the 1.25 miles will come, but I think he heads to the Breeders' Cup Classic as a real clear favorite for the Breeders' Cup Classic after winning the Awesome Again. And then people can really have their discussion, can McKenzie win at 10 furlongs? By the way, I think he can win at 10 furlongs. Breeders' Cup Classic was not his day. Second race after a long layoff against all those good older horses. But anyway, I digress. McKenzie Saturday here looks tough. Second choice certainly should be Higher Power, Matt, coming off a big win for John Sadler in the Pacific Classic.
Yeah, and that win, as we know, in the Pacific Classic was going 10 furlongs. This is back to 9 furlongs. Big difference in those kind of races in the pace scenario, etc. in there. But yeah, that was an impressive victory. It came over a number of the other horses that are in the field. Draft Pick was second in there. Mongolian Groom was third in the Pacific Classic. Seeking the Soul was farther back in that race. So still, I agree with you, Brian. In this spot, McKenzie looks awfully tough.
Yeah, Higher Power, Matt, we will say this. He's been in the John Sadler barn now for 4 races, and he certainly looks like a better horse for it since he's got to the Sadler barn. That first race, though, was at Santa Anita on the dirt, and he was well beaten 5th in the Gold Cup behind Vino Rosso. Now maybe Sadler's had his time to work his magic, and Higher Power has really turned the corner. There's 2 turf races he ran in between that poor performance in the Gold Cup and the big win in the Pacific Classic. Were pretty sharp little turf races, and the Gold Cup was, or the Pacific Classic was a pretty strong performance. Was it a fluke? Maybe he can't string 2 races like that together, but I think the performance itself in the Pacific Classic makes him at least a thought here in the Awesome Again and moving forward to the Breeders' Cup Classic. The horse, of course, you mentioned that didn't run in that race very well at all was Seeking the Soul. Seeking the Soul, that was his first race out in Southern California. We need to see whether Seeking the Soul can do it out there. But I expect at least a return to form for the Dallas Stewart trainee and a much better performance than he did in the Pacific Classic. And maybe he's the one that can rally up for second behind McKenzie.
Yeah, and there's the factor of wondering what the racing surface at Santa Anita is going to be like. Now, in this fall meeting starting, we know that at Del Mar, they had a very successful meeting in terms of the safeness of the racetrack, but it was a very, very different kind of racing surface for Southern California than has typically been the case. Some horses loved that surface, some didn't. So we're going to have to see what we get at Santa Anita. Is the track going to be like the old Santa Anita track? Is it going to be more like this Del Mar racing surface that they had this summer? It's a big question mark in there, and I think that was certainly part of what Seeking the Soul ran into at Del Mar. Yeah,
and Seeking the Soul, of course, the plan was to get him to the Breeders' Cup Classic with some races out there in Southern California. The first race did not go well. I think the second race probably will go better, but beating McKenzie seems like a tough task indeed. the others behind higher power that day in the Pacific Classic draft pick, Mongolian Groom, nice enough horses, consistent, decent horses, but I think just a cut below, and I don't see them really providing a threat now as we really get serious about the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Yes, I agree with you, Brian.
All right, so we got McKinsey almost as big a favorite in the Awesome again as Midnight Bassoon in the Beldame, although higher power, if he can throw that second straight big race in, who knows? Maybe he is a horse to give McKinsey a real race out there. Matt, there's one other race I want to focus on for HorseCenter today, and we can call it a Breeders' Cup Classic, maybe a Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, one or the other. It's a race that could lead into bigger things. I was impressed with the field, both the size of the field, 11 horses, and also the quality and the depth of this Oklahoma Derby. Remington Park, 9 furlongs, 400,000, just a grade 3. But it's a pretty nice little race there at Remington Park on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah,
or Sunday evening, I should say, Matt.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brian. It's a really nice field, big field of 11, $400,000 purse. Maybe some of the horses, some of the higher quality horses in here are in this field because they were scared off a little bit about the prospects of facing maximum security in the Pennsylvania Derby, and we know that didn't come to be. But so there they are, all out at Remington Park. Going 1.1 1/8 in the Oklahoma Derby.
Well, shame on them, Matt, if anyone didn't run in the Pennsylvania Derby because they were afraid of maximum security. Shame on them. But what we do have is a good race. Clearly, Bob Baffert, we got to start with him, the trainer with all these great horses running across the country, including 3-year-olds. Mucho Gusto. 2 nice wins, stakes wins in Southern California before he comes east. Runs a good second in the Haskell, runs a good third in the Travers. Coming out of the 10 hole here at Oklahoma, he looks like the horse to beat.
Yeah, Brian, I agree with you. Here's Baffert there, sending Mucho Gusto to Oklahoma. Certainly, you haven't seen many HorseCenter shows where I end up picking 2 Bob Baffert horses to win the races we're covering, but that's kind of where I am right now. I think Mucho Gusto comes into the race in really fine form as a horse that's getting better, and I think it sets up well for him.
Yeah, well, just like last week's Cotillion, Matt, I'm going to go against the clear favorite here. Mucho Gusto. Coming out of the 10 hole, I think there is some speed in here, and I think he's going to get that. In the Travers, he was 3-1. Owendale and Tax were both 7-1. He beat both of them, although he beat both of them by a couple lengths. They weren't far behind. Even Owendale, I think, was a length and a half back. So I think it's an even bigger difference in odds this time, 3-1, 7-1, 7-1. I think Mucho Gusto is closer to even money in here. I don't want him in here. I realize he could win. But with some other speed and an outside post and horses I think really are just as good as Mucho Gusto, it makes absolutely no sense for me to tout Mucho Gusto here in my pick. My pick will be the horse just outside him, the only horse outside him in the starting gate at Remington Park, Matt. That's Owendale. And a lot of that is based on the fact that I think there will be some pace pressure. But also I think Owendale, when he was beaten by Mucho Gusto a length and a half in the Travers, I just didn't like where he was the entire race. He was stuck down on the rail. Big, strong, rallying type of horse. I never really won on the rail anyway, but I think Saratoga, that just wasn't the place to be all meet. I think Owendale comes back for trainer Brad Cox. I don't mind him being outside as a rallier in here. I think he comes back for trainer Brad Cox, jockey Florent Charoux, and runs a big race. And hey, if we can get 4-1, Matt, in the Oklahoma Derby on Owendale after his 5th place finish in the Travers, I'll be pretty happy camper before they open the gates.
Yeah, I think this is certainly a much, much better spot for Owendale than the Travers was, and I think it's worth noting that we remember Owendale's victory in the Ohio Derby. It's worth noting that victory gets flattered by the Pennsylvania Derby winner Math Wizard is who is the horse that Owendale beat in there. So that Ohio Derby looks even better in there. And you're right. I think the X factor in here is going to be Tax. What are we going to see from Tax out here in Oklahoma? Is Tax going to be the one to put the speed out there and be able to soften up Mucho Gusto? It'll be interesting to see, but I too expect a better performance from Owendale in here than in the Travers.
Okay, you mentioned Tax. He was one of the other big three, one of the big three favorites in here. Like Owendale, though, I think people will look at that Travers and really jump on Mucho Gusto, Baffert factor as well. So Owendale and Tax should have some decent odds if you like either one of them. I do agree, though, that Tax's job seems to be clear-cut going into this race, Matt, because the last thing they want to do is let the big favorite Mucho Gusto alone on the lead. So I think Tax is one of them that will be out there pressuring. Listen, Tax is a nice horse. He was too wide in the Travers, and yeah, he finished 7th, but on the other hand, he was just a couple lengths behind Mucho Gusto in 2nd. I don't think that was the best from Tax. He's a nice horse. But the job of Tax and Mucho Gusto going, at least pressuring each other early, I think really sets it up for the horse I like best, Owendale. But Tax is another horse in here where I think he's a big threat, and I think he's right on the level of Mucho Gusto personally. What else, Matt? We got Long Range Toddy, who's won some races. I guess he's won 3 in a row. If you look way back to his 2-year-old year at this track, Remington Park, you got to consider him. You got some decent New York breds. Bankgate, of course, went down to Oklahoma last year and just missed behind Long Range Toddy in the Springboard Mile. Funny Guy's a nice New York bred. View Magic is well-bred and sharp on turf right now. Cairo Cat was a good 2-year-old. His 2 return races are just okay. There is one long shot, though, I do want to mention, Matt, and I'll let you get to yours. Sleepy Eyes Todd. He's not Long Range Toddy. He's Sleepy Eyes Todd. Lightly raced. He's real sharp, coming from Minnesota, of all places, Canterbury Park. But he ran well last year at Remington Park last year as a 2-year-old, and I think the form and the tactical speed on Sleepy Eyes Todd. I know Mucho Gusto, Owendale attacks are good, but I don't think they're grade 1 good. So I think Sleepy Eyes Todd, if he's as sharp as I think, might be a horse who can get into the picture at long odds.
Yes, that horse will certainly be at long odds in here. So throwing him into your exotic sounds like a plan. I guess for me, it looks like Owendale, Mucho Gusto, exacta box.
All right, so Matt likes Mucho Gusto, the favorite, with Owendale. I'm on Owendale on top, but I like Sleepy Eyes Todd as my long shot in the Oklahoma Derby, Matt. And we did talk about the Pennsylvania Derby. Very disappointing race. Improbable broke slowly. I think that changed the race. Mr. Money, who I liked, as you all know, was on the lead. I don't think he wanted to be on the lead. And Gabriel Saez, his longtime jockey, was kind of trying to pull him back for what seemed like 6 furlongs, 3/4 of the race, 2/3 of the race there. It just didn't seem like the same Mr. Money. Yeah, maybe I'm making excuses, but I just didn't like the way the race set up. Improbable probably didn't get his best chance, but he is what he is. I don't think he's a superstar by any means. War Will just hasn't been as good since the Preakness. And we had Math Wizard, the Ohio Derby runner-up, come and get him late, and the only horse who didn't want to be near the lead in a funny paced race.
Yeah, that's for sure. Mr. Money, whether it was the case of a bunch of races in a row, and he was a little off. But to me, he looked a little headstrong going down the stretch to begin, and I chalked that up to the rider trying to harness his speed, and we seem to be with a horse like that, just let him run, because it isn't going to do you any good to fight with him for 6 furlongs and then expect the best coming down the stretch. So. If he's going to go, let him go. And I think if that was the case, he may have settled into a nice stride and been able to win the race. But no taking away from Mr. Money that win streak that he put together.
Yeah. Well, it does take away from it a little bit because this was the Grade One opportunity, and he didn't get it done. He got beat late by a neck by a long shot. Math Wizard is on to the Breeders' Cup Classic for what it's worth. This is a horse who's been knocking on the door here and there. Made a move in the Wood Memorial. Was a good second in the Ohio Derby, but in the last two races, Mr. Money was much better than Math Wizard, and that certainly was not the case on Pennsylvania Derby Day for whatever reason. But I agree with Matt. Mr. Money should have rolled early instead of trying to fight the horse a little bit. And then we had, or before that, we had the Cotillion, Matt, and we were both talking about Street Band. She went off at 7-1. She was my top pick. You were on the exacta. Really nice run. Sophie Doyle gets a big win, and she's now won 3 Oaks with this filly. I guess the Cotillion's not an Oaks, but 3 nice races this year. So it was nice to see Street Band and Sophie Doyle win the Cotillion.
Yeah, Larry Jones has a way with the fillies, particularly those 3-year-old fillies, and you know, the race set up perfectly. Street Band is obviously one that is coming into her own right now, and boy, that was a great price in there. I had a really big daily double ticket alive to Mr. Money, so I was not very happy with the way that Mr. Money was ridden in that race, but Math Wizard's victory was certainly a little bit of a feel-good story in there.
Yeah, as was Street Band's win in the Cotillion. All right, Matt, we looked at the Jockey Club Gold Cup, the Beldame. We went out to California for the Austin again, and finally Oklahoma for the Oklahoma Derby there at Remington Park. Matt, can I get a parting shot from you? Remember, sir, we are literally just over 5 weeks from the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah, that seems to be pretty amazing. So a lot of these races that we talked about, folks, this is their final preps heading into the Breeders' Cup. And of course, as always, we couldn't do the show without our friend Brett Workman producing the show.
Hey, thanks to Brett. Thanks to you folks for watching every week. If you haven't yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel here on Horse Racing Nation. I urge you to do so now. Thanks also go out to Derby Wars. Derby Wars is our sponsor and the best contest site out there. Hey, Matt, we talked about it a little bit, but let's give the folks a trail off here. Pace makes the race, sir, and that certainly was the case in the Cotillion. An improving filly for Larry Jones. Street Band with Sophie Doyle winning the Cotillion at Parks.
And they're off in the Cotillion Stakes. Great beginning for Serengeti Empress as she flashes her speed on the inside. Horologist Garada close up. Jaywalk is forwardly placed from the outside. So into that first turn, it's Serengeti Empress with Jaywalk alongside. Garada settles back in third. Horologist a good spot on the inside. Fourth, Bellafina has gotten good early position on the outside. Then it is farther back to Sweet Sammy G. Geltrin to the inside. Will go to the backstretch about 8 lengths off the lead. Then it's a Fleet Destiny, Collegeville Girl. Street Band has only 1 horse beaten right now, and that's Long Shot She Makes Me Smile. Very fast quarter, 22-3, and Jaywalk has made the front. Jaywalk 3/4 of a length. Bellafina will track her on the outside. Serengeti Empress is covered up. She's third at the inside, just better than 2 lengths off the lead. Garada in a good spot. She's fourth on the outside and is again edging up now within 2.5 after a strong half of 46-1. So it's Jaywalk. Jaywalk to the far turn, just a neck in front. Bellafina now comes up on even terms. Serengeti Empress trying to get out from in behind those two. Garada got first run on Serengeti Empress. Horologist trying to get involved now. It's Bellafina. Bellafina has taken the lead with 5/16 to go. Garada now right at her neck. Horologist is in with a chance. Serengeti Empress still trying to find some way through. They come to the top of the stretch, and it is Garada. Garada has taken the lead. Street Band has made a big move on the far outside. They're coming down to the final furlong. Garada, here comes Street Band on the outside, and Street Band has come from far back to take the lead. Garada now second, but Street Band is beginning to move away, and this will be a signature moment for Street Band. She's 7-1, and she's got it. Street Band wins the Cotillion just over 2 at the end. Garada was second, and then Horologist and Bellafina.